Hello, readers, friends, and everyone else out there. It's Aaron here for another episode of One Row Reviews. Here's how far the project has gone since last One Row Reviews. Now, I apologize if my voice sounds off tonight. I have just been terribly sick for about a week and a half. Just starting to feel human again today, as of the day I'm recording this. So, if my voice sounds a little off, I apologize for that, but figured I was feeling well enough to go ahead and knock out one row here, so I'd go ahead and talk about what I've been reading, because I have managed to do some reading, all despite sleeping most of the week, this past week. You'll notice I'm adding this nice little orangey-red color here, which I have assigned to horror. I've assigned it to horror in part because it seems like an appropriate color for horror, but also I don't have a huge amount of this, and there's probably not going to be a whole lot of horror on this blanket, because I don't read a lot of horror generally. I am a big wimp when it comes to horror, horror movies especially, but horror novels will freak me out sometimes too. But I did read some horror recently, in part because I happen to know the author of these books, and I really want to interview him on my blog. I occasionally do these little 6-question interviews with authors on my blog, and I like to have read at least a couple of their books before I interview an author on my blog. So I wanted to go ahead and read some of his, and the one that I read, it was a short one, so I actually managed to finish it this week, despite not feeling good. It's called Bilbo the Clown Fights Evil by T. Thornton Gray. And I genuinely enjoyed it. It's really good. It's about this guy who's very down on his luck, and the one thing he has in his life that brings him joy is about once a week he dresses up like a clown and he goes and entertains the children at the hospital. And so he's there entertaining the children at the hospital, and there's this one little girl who just been there for so long, and he has been watching her continue to deteriorate, and it's just really making him sad. And this nun shows up, and he's not entirely sure why she's there. But they have this conversation, and she gives him this thing that allows him to see what is going on in the spirit world around him. And so he's suddenly able to see all of this demonic activity that's going on in the hospital and is causing a lot of people in the hospital to get sick, things like that. And he takes it upon himself, with some divine guidance, to try and make this right. It's pretty exciting. A lot of focus on character in it, a lot of focus on the action in it. It reads, honestly, more like an urban fantasy than I would generally expect a horror novel to read. Which in my case is a good thing, because I love urban fantasy. So, and I know there's a lot of crossover between urban fantasy and horror, at least there can be. But this was a pleasant surprise for me. It read a lot more like that than I thought it would. So if you're a horror fan, definitely give Bilbo the Clown Fights Evil a try, because it's a nice, quick little horror read. If you're an urban fantasy reader and you're wanting to give something a little bit different a try, something that's quick and low magic and has a little bit of horror element to it, give Bilbo the Clown Fights Evil a try. I think you might enjoy it. That was not the only thing I read this week. I also read a nonfiction. It was called The End of Membership as We Know It by Sarah Sladek. I have some notes written down over here in case I forget things. Sarah L. Sladek, which is about membership associations and how attitudes towards them are changing and what they need to do to stay relevant going forward. An older book, it was written back in 2011, but one of my jobs is as administrative assistant for Wyoming Writers Incorporated, which is our state writers association here in Wyoming. So I thought I'd give it a read. Nothing earth-shattering in it. A lot of things I already knew and some things I had already come to the conclusion of on my own. But nice to have some validation on those things and know that my thinking is correct in a lot of those aspects of different things that we're trying to do and things. So it was, I'm glad I read it, even though, like I say, there wasn't really anything new for me in it, but still did get a couple of interesting explanations for why certain things are the way they are, things that I would not have thought of. For example, it talked about generational differences in how people look at associations and how baby boomers are driven by a desire to serve. And so for them, like paying dues in a membership association that's just something you do because it's the right thing to do because, you're serving your community and your industry. And Gen Xers and millennials are much more likely to look at the dues for a membership association and say, well, what value am I getting out of it by paying these dues? And so as things move forward, membership associations will have to think a lot more about that, which was interesting. I kind of suspected that to a certain extent, but hadn't really thought of it from the generational perspective before. So that was interesting. And I also made more progress on A Tempest of Tea by Hasfah Faizal. Still a good book. Still a little more heavy-handed with the romance and the swooniness than I would prefer, but still liking the plot. Still definitely liking the characters. There's this really interesting aspect of it that's like a sword in the stone type thing, where there's this pistol that one of the characters has pulled out of a stone, and the government sort of set this up as like a distraction, like to keep people focused on this and, give people something else to think and hope for, and so people wouldn't be thinking about what the government was doing. And so she figures it out and gets the pistol out of the stone and causes a bunch of hullabaloo, which actually happens before the book starts, but then the fact of the pistol being there has some interesting effects on the present of the story too. So very interested to see where that ends up going. Although admittedly there was one point where, they were talking about that. I was like, ooh, yeah, here's some cool information about this. And then the character noticed a flash of skin because their love interest's shirt raised up a little bit or something, and then they were feeling things. And I was like, no, go back to the thing about the sword and the stone stuff. I'm like, I want to hear more about that. But anyway, it's still a good book. Definitely recommend it if you're a fantasy fan and you're okay with a heavy dose of swoony romance in there, swoony slow burn romance, then give it a try. I thought there was going to be a love triangle in it, but so far it appears that there is not going to be, which is nice because I'm not a huge fan of love triangles. I'm not 100% against them. I just find that most of the time they are not my cup of tea. But it appears that we are going to avoid that in this book, which is nice. Anywho, I have gotten to the end of this row. So that is it for this episode of One Row Reviews. We'll see you next time.